All right, welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. Thanks so much for joining me. It is the post-debate conversation with Chase Oliver, who is the leading third-party candidate in the race. He is the Libertarian presidential nominee. Chase Oliver, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, thank you for having me. Look forward to speaking with you and to your audience today. I enjoyed doing the simulcast debate coverage that we just did, but I guess I'm going to have to go home and watch this crazy debate to really see what happened all night.
Yeah, you didn't get to see a lot of it, did you?
No, I got to see bits and pieces, here and there during commercial break, and we ended a little bit before the closing statements happened, so I got to watch a little of the tail end there, and it did seem like a something I'm going to have to go back and watch, so I know exactly what these people were rambling on about.
Well, let's start with your opponents, okay? As every person loves to start their interview with the opponents, but watching a little bit of the debate, watching Donald Trump on the campaign trail, what is your assessment of Donald Trump? What do you think his next term would look like?
Well, I've always said that I think Donald Trump is a chaos agent, that he's somebody, it's really hard to nail down exactly what he would do because a lot of times with both foreign and domestic policy, he kind of just takes the rhetoric or the idea of the last person like kind of whispered into his ear or had a good idea. This is why you see his foreign policy is very different than say when he hired John Bolton, right, to be his national security advisor,
national security advisor.
Yeah, and so to me, he's just a chaos agent. He's somebody who is so erratic, and that's because he doesn't have any base principles or philosophy other than I need to look good, I need to be popular,
right?
Which is just kind of a rank populism without any kind of principles behind it. It's one thing to be a populist when you have some sort of principle or guiding light, but when you're just willy-nilly this kind of chaos agent, I mean, look no further than abortion. 3 years ago, he was, I'm going to be the most pro-life president. I'm the first president to speak at the March for Life, and now he's like, we need more weeks than 6 weeks.
He's had 5 different positions in a week and a half.
Exactly. And so that kind of erratic nature is not good. If for no other reason, A, it creates that unpredictability, but B, it just makes it where he is susceptible to kind of like suggestion.
Yeah.
And I'd rather have a president who's principled, and I think I beat him in that in spades.
So we're taking your questions. Leave a comment here on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. We're going to take your questions for Chase Oliver, the Libertarian Party presidential nominee. Let's talk about Kamala Harris. I mean, what would her term look like would she win?
Well, her term would look like a continuation of the Biden policies of big government, of more and more deficit spending, of continuing to find the solution in the central planning of government at the top levels. I think that's bad for our economy, that's bad for growth, and really it goes against the free market principles that our nation was founded upon. Even when you see the fact that the Biden administration continued much of the tariffs that they criticized Donald Trump for initiating, but they never got rid of these things. So they're continuing their own form of economic protectionism while also wanting to raise taxes, raise spending, and ultimately that's going to stifle our economy in the long run while still adding trillions to the debts and deficits. So I think it's bad news all around if she were to be elected because it would just be a continuation of the broken status quo.
So Donald Trump is proposing a tariff across the board. Kamala Harris in the debate called it a national sales tax, essentially. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, it is a tax on the consumers. When a tariff is put on, say, Chinese goods, it's not the Chinese companies that are paying that. It's not the nation of China that pays that or their government. It's the individual consumer who buys Chinese goods. It raises the cost of goods in this country, and so it is a tax essentially on consumers, and it is essentially, it would be I guess a sales tax is a close way to describe it. It's a little different than a sales tax, but essentially it's a tax on every single American for the goods they buy, and it's not good for our economy, and it's not fighting China. It's just not, and
right.
Yeah, so I would agree with her that the tariffs are bad, but then why has Biden continued so many of them?
Sure. How much of a change do you think she would actually be from Biden?
Maybe she'd be a little more clear in her speaking, a little more coherent at times.
Awake, alert,
alive.
Not at the beach.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And maybe that's more dangerous because you have somebody that has the same kind of beliefs, that same kind of economic theory that relies on the state, except you'd have somebody who's going to have a little bit more energy and, capability to get those things done than, say, maybe a doddering old man.
Yeah.
So in many ways, I think it could actually be worse than Joe Biden.
Sure.
But also, if you just look at her history as a prosecutor and as a DA, there's much to be desired on even the left side of the aisle from her history and things that she still has not really come to terms with. The amount of people she arrested, trying to push the drug war in the state of California, wanting to arrest truant parents, keeping people in their prison terms longer than they need to for the sake of volunteer firefighting from prisoners. Like, there's a lot of things that leave her much to be desired. And, I think in many ways she would be worse than Joe Biden.
So the first question tonight was about affordability and the economy. What is your plan to make housing, groceries, and just daily life more affordable for people?
Well, the first thing we have to do is stop the primary driver of inflation, which is the debt and deficits. We have to balance the federal budget and stop printing trillions of dollars out of thin air, because that is the largest driver of inflation across the spectrum. Ways we can address individual things, price increases for housing or food. We can modernize our supply chain by removing things like the Jones Act, too, which artificially raises the cost of living for folks who live in Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and other areas of the country. And for housing, it's not really a federal policy we could pass, but it's something you'd have to use the bully pulpit to push to end housing regulations in cities all across America. Like in Atlanta, we need to remove zoning regulations that allow for high-density housing to be built. There's a lot of NIMBY liberals that try to prevent that from happening. Those are the worst kind of liberals, by the way, the not in my backyard liberals. They want it in someone else's backyard, but not their own.
Right.
And so we have to fight that NIMBYism in our cities across America to actually make affordable housing. If we don't build the homes that are affordable, we're never going to be able to put people into those homes. So that one's not directly related to the presidency. That's more of a local issue that we libertarians in our neighborhoods and communities across America can be pushing for. I'll certainly be doing it in my home city of Atlanta.
So when Joe Biden talks about how he built 3 million homes in the last year, what do you make of that?
Well, just like government doesn't create jobs, they don't build homes either, and I wouldn't want to live in a home that's built by the federal government. It would probably be a pretty rickety house, just based on the way the federal government does everything else. So, but no, and I think the more apt thing would be if someone said, I created conditions to where this many jobs were created under my tenure by private industry. You could argue that, and I would argue that we could do it a heck of a lot better if we lowered the cost of starting a business, lowered the cost of running a business. We could create a heck of a lot more jobs under a libertarian policy umbrella than we could under Joe Biden, certainly.
Is there a day one regulation that you have read about that you're just excited to be elected president so you can get rid of it?
Oh, my God. There's far too many in the federal code to just pick. I wholesale want to just get rid of the entire Department of Education. So when you want to talk about like removing an entire regulatory framework, that's one that pushes the federal mandate onto cities and states all across the country. They give you $1 worth of funding and then give you $1.10 worth of regulatory action that you have to maintain that funding, and it creates this vicious cycle. So I don't know. There's far too many to name than just one regulation. One of the things I think would be, I joke and say it's probably the most unsexy policy proposal, is that I would have my staff go line by line through the tax code to find loopholes and regulations to get rid of. Sounds pretty boring,
right?
But when you put it all together, you could create a huge boon for individuals and saving a lot of money from the government robbing of them their tax money. So I don't know if I could pick just one.
Yeah, a lot of my questions. I love John Stossel. I watched your interview with John Stossel and posing different questions. But I think if you're an average listener listening to that, you go, man, he's going to get rid of the Department of Education. That's really scary. My kid's not going to be educated. I think libertarians often have messaged to other libertarians around that kind of stuff. And I know I asked the question, but if you're just a regular person tuning in, we've got a few hundred people watching now, you want to get rid of the Department of Education?
Yeah.
All this stuff sounds really scary, right? You're going to get rid of all these regulations that are meant to protect us, Chase.
Yeah, I think one of the things we libertarians need to do better as we communicate, and I've certainly tried to do this as a candidate for president, is argue that, libertarians are not lacking for empathy. We actually care about our neighbors and our community. We're not just stuck in our little individual hermit hole, not caring about what goes on outside of our own lives. It's just we recognize that government is like the worst way to facilitate helping our neighbors and our communities grow and thrive. So getting rid of the Department of Education doesn't mean we're not going to have educated kids. It means we're going to hopefully, if we can start, if we're going to taxpayer fund education, it should be done funding the student, not the system. Why? So we can empower students and parents to find the best school for their kids that are going to provide them the best choice to become a critical thinker and a lifelong learner. And perhaps it's also tailor-made education. Maybe you're a kid that's going to go be on stage, you want to be the next Broadway actor, you're going to go to Juilliard, you want to go to a performing arts school. Maybe you're a kid that loves science and technology and you want to go to a STEM school so you can focus on the areas of study that you really think are going to be where you're going to push yourself in the future as a career. Allowing that kind of free market of education actually empowers students and parents to make better choices. It also empowers educators. I have a lot of friends who are teachers who got in the profession because they had a great teacher growing up. And then they get the job in the school system. And they're like, oh my God, what is this? All this red tape and curriculum crap that I have to deal with? I could teach it so much better if I could do X, Y, or Z. On a free market of education, we allow those educators to do that. They're still going to want to be teachers even if there wasn't public education in this country. We'd still have a lot of need for teachers. And so I hope we can remove that fear from voters by explaining that just because we want to remove the government's hand in something doesn't mean we don't want it to happen. We still think it's actually better facilitated outside of the realm of government.
It's often a misnomer that being opposed to government solutions doesn't mean that you don't want things to happen.
Exactly. Like welfare is a big example. I think government is probably the worst facilitator of providing help for the less fortunate and for those in need. You get a way lower rate of return when you just insist that your taxes being taken away from you and just let the government handle it. I think mutual and direct aid in our communities, if we were given our tax money back, we could way better allocate those resources to help those in need directly as opposed to just shoveling it through the money machine of the government where it goes through each and every bureaucratic level and all through the red tape. And, they'll tax you $1 and you get back a dime. That doesn't sound like a square deal. And I think it's way better to allocate those resources outside of a broken government. But it doesn't mean we don't care for people.
Yeah. So this leads to something that I've really thought a lot about and struggled with. Libertarians are kind of in a difficult position because entitlements have to be reformed, ended, depending on your level of libertarianness. Entitlements meaning Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. These are our biggest draws on the government debt. The nation has to reform these or end them to be financially solvent. But to do that means a lot of cost, and I don't mean cost in terms of monetary cost, I mean human cost, because our marginalized people depend on these programs. How would a libertarian president transition us in a way that protects people while also leading us to financial solvency?
Well, first thing we have to be is honest with the American people, that removing ourselves from entitlements now will create pain. I don't use the term cost, I use the term pain. It'll cause pain for individuals. But the truth is that if we had reformed these entitlements 10 years ago, there would be less pain than there is today, and there will be more pain if we reform these entitlements 20 years from now. So it starts off with being honest with the American people that, there will be disruption, there will be, points of pain for certain people. But I think the way we transition ourselves is with Social Security. First off, we want to make sure those who are already relying on Social Security are able to do that. But for younger workers like myself, we need to be honest with them that this trust is bankrupt. It's continuing to create trillions of dollars in deficit to keep this going, this Ponzi scheme going. And so we're going to rely on you to have your own employee contribution returned back to you to save for your own retirement. It sounds scary, but the truth is if you just put that money in the S&P 500, you're going to get a lot more money back than you did putting it into Social Security. And so, yes, there will be points of pain, and while we want to keep those who are on Social Security able to live on it, like my parents, many people's parents and grandparents, as I mentioned with Abdul, who's a Gen Xer, as we get younger, you're going to slide back in that term of benefits, and there will be points of pain there. But I would rather us address the issue now than in 20 years from now, where it's even going to be worse. And the same thing with Medicare and Medicaid. We have to start untying every single knot, the regulatory framework that's been created through this entitlement healthcare program, and start removing ourselves from it. Because if we don't, the cost, the pain that you're talking about will be far greater in the next generation than it is right now. And maybe it's because I'm a millennial and I'm just used to having the shit shoveled on me,
Yeah.
I'm just like, you know what? Put the pain on us now so we don't have to deal with it in the future for our kids and grandkids. And so, maybe that's just the millennial in me that says, we recognize we're going to hurt. Like, there's nothing that's painless. Lord knows we've lived in this world. We've seen the housing market. We've tried to go along to get along, but, being honest at first and saying, there's going to be a cost to that, but the cost will be far lower now than it will be in the future. is something that I think we libertarians should communicate better.
What libertarian solution would you like to see when it comes to retirement insurance and Social Security? What's the end goal?
Well, the end goal is to fully remove the government from the equation altogether. I would fully like to sundown that program, make the generation that's currently living on Social Security the last generation that has to rely on Social Security for their retirement. Because like I said, any retirement mutual fund, IRA, just putting your money in the S&P, you're going to get a greater rate of return. And so it's a Ponzi scheme. That is what Social Security is today. And unfortunately, our parents and grandparents can't save for retirement. They're already retired. And so they're going to have to live on that fixed income. I don't want that to be the fate of my generation or the generations that come behind me.
All right, let's take our first question from the audience. We are taking your questions. Please leave a comment. Let's take a question from David Kratz, who says, how will you make kids safer in schools? Let's start there.
So, first off, the issue of school shootings hits very close to home for me. I live in Georgia. We just had the shooting at Appalachia High in Winder. I have a nephew who goes to school in Winder, Georgia, the school just across town. He knows people who have lost their lives and been injured in the shooting in Appalachia. So when I say it hits close to home, it does. It's a very traumatic experience. That being said, I think the rush to gun control is not really the right path to be taking. We've always had guns in our society. My mom, she likes to tell the story of they had a rifling club in her high school. So boys would come to, she said boys would come to school with rifles on their, bagged on their arms. They'd put it in their locker. And then after school, they'd go do target shooting on the football field. Mm-hmm. Well, there was never a school shooting there.
Right.
But there were guns literally available in the halls. So we have to look at what's the X factor of creating this violence in our schools. We've always had guns, but since Columbine, I think the two major contributing factors is the rise of social media and how that can isolate somebody into finding extremism online, but also it allows you to go online and be completely dehumanize people or be dehumanized yourself, which can lead to real mental health outcomes, isolation, and again, push towards extremism that can create violence to bubble to the surface. The other thing is we're not really addressing those mental health issues of young men that we see as the highest perpetrators of mass shootings in this country are young men. Many times they are on psychotropic drugs when maybe talk therapy might be a better alternative. But we need to examine why we have this generation of angry and lonely young men and deal that from a cultural perspective and not just, we'll just remove guns. We'll just create gun confiscation or gun control. That's not going to solve the issue of violence because violence, it doesn't happen just to the barrel of a gun. If someone wants to be violent, they'll find a way to do it. So I think we need to not infringe on Second Amendment rights, but look at what's causing these. And then, of course, harden the targets of our schools, make it harder for somebody to get into a school. As we build new schools, we need to look at what we can do with building codes and things. Well, not building codes, but just how we can build buildings to make it harder for somebody to enter into and cause harm. And I do believe in removing the target of gun-free zones. Allow teachers that want to carry and can go through some sort of whatever certification that individual school thinks that teacher needs to go through to show that they're responsible. Allow them to carry to defend their students if they want to.
What's your opinion on phones in schools? It's a movement across the country now, thanks to Jonathan Haidt, largely, to start banning phones in schools. Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I think, you shouldn't be on your phone during class, right? You should be paying attention to school. But no, I think it's fine to have phones in schools. Kids are going to be connected. They got to be able to call their parents to come pick them up. They got to be able, if there's an emergency, they need to be able to reach out to their friends and family to let them know they're all right. And ultimately, tools like the phones also gives you access to the internet. So if you're needing to study or find information very quickly in your studies in school, you should be able to access that. I don't see a problem with phones in schools. I don't think that's the sole factor that's causing this problem.
So let's jump to abortion. Let's get into the weeds. That was the second question in the debate tonight. I know you didn't get to see it, but Donald Trump's answer, he went first, was they're killing babies after they're born, and there's late-term abortion everywhere, and we just need to stop it now. And then Kamala Harris came in and spoke, I think, to the real concern of, I'm pro-life, I'm very pro-life, but my wife is of childbearing age in a red state, and I don't want her to die of an ectopic pregnancy, right? It's very complicated in terms of an issue and a very personal issue. Kamala Harris really seemed to understand that and speak to that. where do you come down on the issue of abortion generally, and then specifically, how would you like to see that rolled out? Is that in all 50 states? Is that a federal ban? What do you think?
Well, I am pro-choice. I ascribe to the standards of Roe and Casey, which is abortion should be available and legal up to the point of viability. After viability, there should be an exception made for health and life of the mother that a doctor determines. I think that's where most Americans are on the issue. Even many who are personally pro-life may say it's not a choice I would make, but it's not a choice I want to make for other people. And so I'm somebody who would like to see that bodily autonomy defended in all 50 states, because I ultimately think that the decision should be made by you as an individual, exercising the most local governance, your self-governance. And we need to respect bodily autonomy in all 50 states. I do think to me, it is a little disingenuous for pro-life. I see Donald Trump saying this, like, oh, well, I just wanted to take it to the states, but he believes abortion is murder. If you believe abortion is murder, you'd want it legal in all 50 states. You wouldn't want some states to have it legal and some states to not. I don't believe it is murder. I do believe ultimately it is someone exercising their choice. That is a very difficult, decision for individuals to have to make for themselves. I don't want to make that decision for anybody. I don't want to have to be anybody's conscience. And ultimately, like I'll be real with you. I'm a gay man who I don't have a uterus, so it's not really going to be an issue that I have to affect personally in my own life. I would much rather you and your family make those determinations, and other people make those determinations at the individual level by defending bodily autonomy. And I will say this. First off, nobody's aborting after birth. That's just ridiculous.
Right.
But late-term abortion is less than 1% of abortions. And I've spoken with, I know somebody who had to have a late-term abortion. They were already a parent to triplets, and they were pregnant, and it looked like the child was not viable. It was going to die shortly after birth and could create serious health consequences for the mother if they went through with birth. And she was pro-life. And her doctor even said, I understand you're personally pro-life, but I just want you to know I will sign off on a medical abortion for this if you need it, if you choose it. And she went home and she prayed with her husband, and he woke up the next morning and he was on the edge of the bed, and she said, what's wrong? And he said, well, I prayed all night about it, and God said you needed to be a mother to 3 children and not a dead mother to 4. And they made the very difficult decision to have a late-term abortion. But that was their choice to make. And even though they were personally pro-life walking into that, they got to make the choice when the rubber met the road. I don't want to deny that for anybody. I think that is an extremely personal decision that I think should be left to individuals.
I want to argue with you really bad, but I'm not going to, because we're going to keep taking questions. So if Democrats or Republicans signed a federal ban on abortion, or said, look, defined it so it would apply to all 50 states, would you sign that?
A ban?
Either a ban, Republicans pass a ban in Congress and bring it to your desk, or Democrats craft a law that makes abortion narrow but acceptable in all 50 states. Would you sign?
Yes.
Both of those?
The latter, I would sign.
Okay, you would veto a Republican ban on abortion.
Yes, because I do think that ultimately a full outright ban would affect the bodily autonomy of individuals. Again, I think that's an individual decision for people to make, but to have that individual decision be made, you have to have it be available.
Okay, Adam Newmeyer writes, what should the government do with respect to artificial intelligence, if anything?
Well, one of the things that we don't want to see is government try to overregulate it, because if anybody's going to screw up AI and make it in some sort of violent, psychopathic tool that's going to destroy the world, it'll be the government doing it. I really think we should be hands-off with overregulating AI. We should take a very laissez-faire approach. Like any new technology, there are people who say it's going to end everything. They said that about the internet; it was going to end everything. People who made horse-drawn carriages were like, "Oh God, cars are going to destroy everything." Right. New technology. I'm actually, an optimist with new technology. I'm somebody who, maybe it's the Trekkie in me, but I'm forward-thinking and thinking about the potential of technology. I think AI has great potential to solve many efficiency issues that exist across the marketplace that will make goods cheaper for us. I think will allow people to do more work with less effort, which I think is a good thing. Ultimately, that we want to be more efficient when we do things. Is there potential for bad things to happen? Yes, any technology has the potential to have bad things happen, but I don't fear AI any more than I feared the internet when the internet was coming up. And I think there's more potential than downside, especially keeping the government out of it.
It doesn't concern you that people within the industry are saying, look, this has potentially life-threatening, definitely altering, but if not threatening consequences. I mean, it's a security risk, and the government ought to have some measure in it.
Yeah, I mean, I understand. There are always people in industries who cry for who cry for regulation. I don't know if I'm as afraid as they are. I mean, maybe I'm going to be proven wrong when Skynet comes online and bombs us all into oblivion, and we're fighting the robots, right? When Terminator becomes a real thing. But I just don't think that that's where the technology is heading. I also think, we're going to stay one step ahead of being able to identify AI, identify things like deep fakes, these kinds of things. Hopefully, we can stay one step ahead. I think that's the next technological arms race. And I have faith in humanity.
I saw a video about Kamala cooking some cats earlier that was dead on. So it's getting scary out there. All right. So Michael Rowe, and again, you can leave your questions in the comments. We'll take your questions. What would the first 100 days look like under your administration, Chase?
Well, I can tell you the first day is going to be me taking the oath of office. And before I even do the rest of my speech, I'm going to pardon Edward Snowden, Ross Ulbricht, Julian Assange, and Leonard Peltier. I then would draft a vision for what I want America to go. I would immediately meet with the Joint Chiefs of Staff and my incoming Secretary of Defense to let them know, hey, we're going to start closing bases. We're going to start wholesale taking percentages off of the DoD budget. And so you need to present a plan to me on how to best draw down these forces as quickly as possible to remove the military footprint from around the world. I would create a domestic policy vision, asking Congress to present to me a balanced budget, one that actually does not need to seek to raise taxes to do this either. They need to cut the fat. They need to cut the redundancies in our government down to size to where we can actually look towards balancing the federal budget, getting the deficit under control. If they submit to me a non-balanced budget, I submit them back to a vetoed budget and challenge them to override me, because I, as president, will not add $1 of deficit or debt to the American people. Congress will have to do that without me. And so I'll make that challenge to Congress to get that done. If they don't get it done, they override me full of trillions of dollars in deficits. I'll make sure the American people know exactly who put that on their kids and grandkids. Lastly, as far as domestic issue challenges, I think the greatest issue we need to face past balancing the budget is streamlining our immigration system. I think it's the one that voters care about the most. It's the first major domestic policy issue I'm going to tackle by having Republicans and Democrats, independents in the room to look at how we can get the 21st century Ellis Island going as quickly as possible. And of course, in doing this, I would also be staffing up and not staffing up agencies as needed.
So that leads me to an important question that I think is the most fundamental one for any libertarian, which is that if you're elected, you're on an island, right? You don't have the infrastructure of a party. You don't have friends in Congress. You don't have partners. Maybe you do. What moves do you make if you get elected to start achieving those top agenda items? Who do you work with and how?
Well, we'll change from issue to issue. You're going to have to create single issue coalitions across the legislature to get things done. It's something I've done in my activism very well. I've worked, across as a libertarian, I've worked with Republicans on constitutional carry in the state of Georgia. When it comes to working with the left on, say, like Stop Cop City or immigration rights, like I walk into the room as the libertarian in the room, recognizing that if we start talking about economics, we're going to quickly disagree about things. But if we stay focused on that single issue coalition, we can get things done. And that's what I would ask members of Congress to do, whether they be Republican or Democrat, is to find the areas of agreement on those issues and get to work on them. Let's not focus on the disagreement at one time. We can focus on that later. What we need to focus is on how can we find partners to get the objectives done that we need to be seeing. Things like immigration reform, things like ending the Department of Education and bringing free market practices to the marketplace of education. Things like ending the wars overseas. I'm going to have to identify those partners in the room and work with whoever can work with me. And that's going to make sure, that's going to require me to say the perfect will not be the enemy of the good. And I'm sure I'm going to work with people on some issues and I'll be fighting them tooth and nail the next day on other issues. We have to recognize that politics is a business and it's not personal. It's about getting objectives done. I would do my best to find those partners, even if they don't have an L next to their name. I'm sure I can find somebody who's anti-war, somebody who's anti-tax, somebody who's pro-immigration, pro-bodily autonomy and medical freedom. I'm sure we can find people to work with.
So Cassandra asks a similar question. How would you lead or deal with a government that leans against libertarian ideals? How would you deal with the administrative state?
Well, First off, as the chief executive, you have a lot of power in staffing those agencies and making sure, I would literally put people, if I can't outright get rid of the agency, I would certainly staff it with people who are going to basically metaphorically sit on their hands and ask that the legislature actually do their job and direct them instead of them being self-directed. So that puts the ball back in the hands of Congress. Of course, you would also want to just wholesale cut a whole bunch of the administrative state away, as quickly as possible. And yeah, you're going to be dealing with people who are absolutely opposed to libertarianism. You have to flex every muscle you can as president. That's why you would veto a budget that's not balanced. That's why you use the power of the bully pulpit to expose those who are doing wrong. And I would flex every muscle I could as president to try to put the role of legislating back in the hand of a legislature, call their bluff and make them actually do the job instead of insisting that I do the job for them, which is what Congress has done with the executive branch for my entire adult life for the most part. So, put the ball back in their court and say, hey, if you want to try to flex your muscle, you better exercise the constitutional authority to do that. And let's put you back in your proper role. And, my proper role is to veto or to not veto and then to execute laws that are passed.
All right, so let's take a question from Rachel Culpepper. Again, we're taking questions with Chase Oliver, the Libertarian Party candidate for president. My home state funds college tuition. What is the LP approach to ensuring Americans having affordable higher education? And would you encourage states to not fund college education?
Well, federally, I think we need to get government out of the realm of higher education altogether. It's why I have a student loan plan that is not loan forgiveness. What it would do is, 90% of government or of student loans are currently government backed. That is creating an artificial floor for the cost of higher education because institutions of higher education know that, hey, if the government's backing the money, we can raise the prices. It's fine. They'll adjust. I think what we need to do is get the government out of the business altogether. So I would seek legislation that would make all currently government-held student loans interest-free as of today so people can pay down the principal. You pair that with no new government student loans so that you transition the marketplace over to more a free market where banks are deciding the value of the degrees in which you're getting. And you'll see institutions lowering the cost of certain degrees to match that demand. And I don't think, I'm not going to tell the states what to do. That's part of deregulating education away from the federal government is to create 50 laboratories of innovation. Do I think state funding of higher education is probably the best way to do it? No. And if I were governor of that state, I might encourage a different path. But as president, I'm going to allow those 50 laboratories of innovation to do what they're going to do. And we'll see the best practices being adopted by others and the worst practices falling by the wayside as they should.
All right, Mark Saxon asks a question that I've had a couple times in prepping for this from folks. How do you maintain the country's contracts to military veterans while streamlining the VA, and what changes do you look for in regards to the Veterans Administration?
Well, you're right. When someone serves this country, they sign a contract, and part of that contract is to provide them the health care they need, both during their service and after they have served, especially if they've been injured in the line of duty. I think the way we streamline the VA altogether is remove a lot of the red tape that allows people to go to the doctor of their choice. I understand the need for VA hospitals. These doctors have specialization in things like burns or missing limbs or other things that are particular to those, things that might happen in a war zone or in a military setting. But for most of your healthcare, you as a veteran should just be able to go to your local doctor without any difficulty. You shouldn't have to fill out any paperwork or go through any bureaucratic mess. You should be able to just put that right on the VA. That would save us so much overhead that any increase in cost from going to a private doctor would be totally eaten up by the loss of the increased overhead that currently exists at the VA. And so, you would streamline the agency itself, but also provide more choice for veterans. I think that is, one of the few things I think government should fund is the military and taking care of its military members after their retirement. Because I'm a minarchist. I think that's one of the few essential functions I think a government should have, and we should do it well.
Well, there goes the anarchist vote.
Hey, listen, I love anarchists. I'll say this. I love you anarchists. And we can continue to have these great debates over anarchy versus minarchy. But in the meantime, let's keep cutting down the state as much as possible together to where one day we get to that minarchist ideal. And hey, maybe I become an anarchist at that point. Maybe I'm like, hey, this minarchy is BS, But until we get to that point, we need to be joining together to fight to tear down the state piece by piece, brick by brick, as much as possible. And when we do that, I think we can facilitate great relationships with anarchists, even though I myself am an anarchist. I also just really love those late night, had a few drink conversations / debates that happen at libertarian conventions between anarchists and anarchists. I once drank moonshine in Tennessee and stayed up an entire night debating an anarchist. So
that's how you know you're a libertarian.
That is how you know you're a libertarian.
Yeah. People are like, what are you, man, anarchist? What are you talking about? Yeah. Let's talk. This is an interesting question for Chuck Pullen. As you know, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are big fans of this show. So they listen to this and they hear Chase Oliver and they go, that guy has a lot of great ideas. He's tremendous. Mm-hmm. And
Huge fan.
They ask you to be in their cabinet. Donald Trump or Kamala Harris says, I want you to be in my cabinet. Do you say yes? And what cabinet position would you pick? What's your interest?
I mean, honestly, it's a very tough question to answer because I think that if a libertarian got in either cabinet, they wouldn't last very long, right? Like maybe I would take the job and I'd be out in like a single Scaramucci, right? Like 11 days or whatever. Yeah. But it's hard to say. It's hard to say no to trying to do your best and serve your country. And I think if there was I don't know where they would want to put me in a cabinet because frankly I disagree with them so much in so many things. Like it'd be the cabinet position they'd want to get rid of the most because they know I would do everything I can to whittle it away.
This is a great plan. I love it.
Yeah. Put me in charge of the IRS and see how well that functions. Okay, right. So I don't think they're going to ask me to serve in their cabinet, but if they did, I would have to take serious consideration of doing it. But I would only do it if I thought I could be effective in the role and reduce things in the government's impact in our lives. So if I was to be put in charge of, say, if I was the attorney general, right, I would want to make sure that the Justice Department is, A, not engaging in lawfare, but also really doing its best to preserve the civil liberties of the people we serve. If I was prevented from doing that by the policies of either the Harris or Trump administration, I wouldn't want to do it. And so my short answer is, yeah, I'd probably try it, but I don't think I'd last very long.
So IRS is your favorite? Which would you choose, even if you know you're not going to make it?
If I could choose any department of the government.
Defense.
Oh, yeah.
Interior.
Probably defense or state so that I could start removing the warfare state around the world and engaging in real diplomacy. That would probably be the ones I would be most interested in. If I were given a cabinet position, yeah, right there at the top, whatever's the closest in like the level of succession, right? So just in case the plane goes down,
I think it's state.
State's the highest one, so we'll go with Secretary of State, and I can do my part to remove the militarized foreign policy from around the world and re-engage in true diplomacy.
All right, so I've got questions for you on that. So Michael Poss ask Chase's stance on leaving NATO.
Yes,
and let me explain NATO if you're watching and you don't know what that is. The Northern Alliance Treaty...
North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Thank you. Okay. And it is a collection of states in Europe and America that have a security pact against the USSR, now Russia, often blamed for Russia invading. Don't personally agree with that, but Trump says he wants to leave NATO or make them pay more or wants to make changes to NATO. What's your position?
The short answer is I would want to leave because I don't think we need to have permanent entangling alliances. I think we were warned by our first president against this, and we should heed the advice of George Washington. Doesn't mean we can't come to the aid of Europe when they are being threatened. We certainly did in World War II. We didn't have a NATO pact then either. Mm-hmm. We also formally declared war, which is nice. So I don't think we need to have NATO to ultimately be a good neighbor. And if a war came that we felt we needed to be invested in, I don't think we need NATO to push us into that war. We would do that ourselves. And so ultimately, I don't think we need to be in such an entangling alliance, certainly not in the post-Cold War world. Maybe you could justify that during the Cold War, but I think post the 1990s, that is kind of a relic we don't need to necessarily have to be a functioning world power.
I mean, I look at it and I don't think it's a coincidence. Ukraine is not a NATO member and they got invaded. I don't think Putin would think twice about invading these other countries if NATO didn't exist. So I look at it as NATO is actually something that helps keep a lot of the peace. What do you think of that argument?
I mean, I think if even if we didn't have a NATO, if Putin really tried to move into Western Europe, there's a good chance the Congress would declare war. So I don't think we necessarily need NATO to be a pushback. But that's just me, and I maybe we agree to disagree on that, but I don't think it's a needed thing in the 21st century for us. First off, we're so military capable. Like we spend more than the next 9 nations combined in terms of military output. One single aircraft carrier could probably take down most major nations in the world these days, one carrier group. And so I don't fear a war with Russia in that way. And ultimately, I think Putin would be smart enough to not engage in a direct war with Western Europe because they know the United States would step in.
So I want to test the limits of a non-interventionist president, okay? Because this is something that I struggle with as a libertarian and just watching the world in the way that it is. In 1994, the United States signed a treaty, the Trilateral Agreement, with Ukraine and Russia. And we said, we will protect you. We'll give you security guarantees in exchange of you giving up your nuclear weapons and giving them to Russia. If Russia ever tries to mess with you, then we will come and protect you. We have Taiwan, Israel, and a lot of other nations around the world that we, over the last 100 years, have agreed that we will be your protectorate. What promises do you decide to keep, not keep? Do you get in and say, I'm bound by these because I'm president and the United States government made these, or I'm bound by my principles. The American people knew what I believed when they elected me, so I have to break these. Where's that line for you?
No, you have to abide by the treaties that exist. When you enter into the office of president, you take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution as it exists. And if there's been a treaty that's been signed and by the Senate, you have to uphold those things. But I would go into office with the express interest in disengaging ourselves from these entanglements and trying to untie these knots. And that is principally where I would want to be from day one. It would be one of the reasons why I would hope people would have elected me. If that's, and to that objective, you have to play by the rules of the game. You can't be extra constitutional just because you think it's the right thing to do because, well, the next guy is going to do something extra constitutional because they think it's the right thing to do. Right. And so you have to abide by those rules. And if I were to go into office, I would go into office wanting to remove myself from NATO, knowing that if I don't and something were to happen, I would be bound by the agreements that have been previously made. And that's unfortunate, and I would like to see our removing ourselves from that, but you can't skip the line. You can't remove steps from that process. You have to abide by the constitutional process as it exists, and you would need legislation to undo those treaties.
Okay, that's great. This is not a comment as much as a question. I just think this is a funny one. Zaya says, "Was a Chris Christie guy, but I'm voting for Chase Oliver now." Hey, it's a
strange world we live in. But I welcome you into the tent. You know what? Come sit a while. Start talking with libertarians. Start coming to our meetings. Start hanging out. We might not agree with everything you agree with at once, Mr. Chris Christie voter. But maybe you become more libertarian as you come in. We want to bring in millions of disaffected voters and to let them know that maybe they have libertarianism on one or two issues, and let's connect that with the greater philosophy of non-aggression and try to make them more libertarian as they go. Like, I welcome your vote. I welcome to earn your vote, and I hope libertarians earn your vote in the future as you become more libertarian.
So this was submitted to me by Anonymous. Springfield, Ohio. Now, look, I'm going to say I don't know that anybody's eating cats. The police there say nobody's eating cats. I know this is an internet meme, but it is a fact that in Springfield, Ohio, has a population of 80,000 people. And they've recently had an influx of 20,000 Haitian immigrants. Now, the meme is ducks and cats are being eaten, and everybody's kind of laughing about it. But underneath that is an anxiety about migration into these smaller towns. And cities are kind of built to absorb some of this. But if you were campaigning in Springfield, Ohio, what would you say to the people in that town that are feeling insecure about multiculturalism, crime, and immigration?
Well, first thing we need to do is start listening to the people in the town. Why are a lot of those Haitians there? Is because there were jobs that need to be filled, and many of them filled jobs and positions because they found blue-collar work that paid really well that needed to be filled. And if you look at the history of why that migration happened to Springfield, Ohio, it's because they basically built a factory and they didn't have people to work it. And so that's what drove people to that area of the country. I'm not afraid of multiculturalism. Like, I don't know what can assuage people's fears other than to say that, immigrants statistically commit less crime than native-born people. They're interested in working, and especially if you're an immigrant, you're interested in keeping your nose clean because if you don't, you run the risk of being deported and losing that the potential for economic prosperity. I don't know any other way to assuage fears other than to say, like, look to these people and treat them as human beings and speak with them. Don't speak about them. Like, interact with the community of immigrants. Like, get to know these people. Maybe it's because I live in a city as diverse as Atlanta, but it's something that I've always grown up around. I've always been around a diverse group of people, and I think it actually makes my life the better for it. But in these small towns, again, we have to look at why people go there. It's not just like all of the Haitian immigrants just got in a meeting and then get into a group chat and go, okay, we're all going to go to Springfield, Ohio. It's because there were people there willing to hire them and provide jobs for them. And now they're part of the community. And I think they're going to grow into that community over time. Just as you would, 150 years ago, you would have had German Americans or Italian Americans or Irish Americans coming into this country. And there was many of the same fears about multiculturalism. But now we have strong German and Polish and Irish and Italian and communities all over this country that help build businesses, that help build the local culture, and that contribute to the American story. I think that's a good thing. And so maybe I can't just assuage somebody's fears with mere rhetoric, but I think when we look to, the way immigration has existed in this country since its founding, it has been something that builds. It's something that actually creates more than it destroys.
What judicial philosophy would you look for in a Supreme Court justice?
I'm not a strict originalist, and I say this because if that were the case, then we would treat the Constitution as written at the time it was written. So the First Amendment would only cover, say, the quill and the printing press, not the online platforms. And so what I would be looking for is somebody who finds original intent but can put that through the 21st century lens of the American public when it comes to things like freedom of speech, the Second Amendment, and other areas. That's the kind of judicial temperament I would be looking for. And I frankly, if I were elected president, my attorney general and all of my prospective Supreme Court nominees would be somebody that I would want to have served as a defense attorney first, who's actually spent time on the other side of a courtroom, not merely being a prosecutor, because I think that insight is very valuable. And certainly in the temperament of judges I would be wanting to nominate, that would be a criteria that would certainly be pushing people to the top of the list, is if they've ever served in a courtroom setting as a defense attorney.
All right, let's go to the questions. Janice McKenzie asks, how specifically would a Chase Oliver administration end the surveillance state in America?
Well, specifically, I would go to every single camera and I would take them all down one by one, CCTV cameras. No, it starts with undoing a lot of the legislation that was passed out of the initial fear and emergency measures of 9/11. It requires things like sunsetting the Patriot Act, sunsetting the warrantless wiretapping, a lot of these programs that came about as ostensibly to protect us from terrorism. Much of it, as we've seen, has been very heavy-handed. And so it's going to start with working with Congress to literally undo much of the legislation that's happened over the last 20 years. It's not sexy to say that, right? It's going to take time for me to work and go through committees and go through all the process. But that's really the only way to do it, other than to say, as the chief executive, I will no longer be directing the NSA to collect metadata. I will be asking them to clear this metadata out so that we're no longer spying on just the average American for what they're doing, and we can actually focus ourselves on, trying to keep the country safe as opposed to trying to know what every single person's doing at every single moment. There's certainly levers you can pull as the chief executive, but in the long run, to make sure that once I'm out of office, if I were elected, that this continues, we'd have to find a legislative solution to that by undoing much of the legislation that was created right when I was getting out of high school and has been around for the last 20 plus years.
Something honest and decent like FISA courts.
Yeah.
What do you keep? I mean, in an age of asymmetric warfare where war's not hopefully ever going to go back to World War I and II and these big battles, it looks a lot like cyber attacks. It's North Korea attacking Microsoft and China trying to steal state secrets, Russia trying to hack into Georgia's election voting machines. Is there a place for the federal government to assist major companies and to centralize national security and protect the nation from cyber attacks and foreign actors?
Well, yeah, the role of our military is to defend our sovereignty from invasion from outside of our borders. And that also applies to, the information age. That applies to technology that maybe didn't exist. Certainly didn't exist when the Constitution was written. But that's the purpose of a military, and certainly that's an application that I think the Department of Defense should be looking more into, as opposed to continuing the military-industrial complex welfare game of building more tanks and more planes, and continue to build more military hardware components in every congressional district across the country. No, I'd much rather the DoD start refocusing itself on the 21st century battlefield, which is information technology, and working with private entities to make sure that they are secure from foreign actors invading them. I don't, in fact, it's a far better use of our military than drone policy of killing innocent people around the world. So I think take those billions away from that. You invest that into information technology and make our people safer, make our industry safer from digital invasion, so to speak.
So if you were president and China invaded Taiwan, what would you do in that first month?
I would not go to war with China. Taiwan would have to defend itself. We have provided Taiwan with billions upon billions of dollars of military readiness and arms. But here's the thing. I don't think that's ever going to happen because I do think that the saber rattling between us and China, if a hot war were to start between our two nations, it would be mutually assured economic destruction because of how entangled our two economies are on the world stage. And so I really don't fear that happening because I think China knows if they did that and it provoked a hot war, it would lead to their downfall as much as possible, as much as it would lead to ours, or probably definitely more so. And so I think they're not keen to doing that. I think the reason why China rattles the saber is because they want to seem ascendant on the world stage and equal to the United States. I think the reason why we rattle the saber is because we want to continue having our military-industrial complex lobbyists whispering into the ears of Congress people, we need these tanks, we need these planes to stop China. I don't fear war with China as much as some people do. But if China were to attack Taiwan, no, I would not send United States forces to fight in that war. I was asked by a guy in his 80s when I was running, actually in Indianapolis when I was campaigning last year, and he came up to me and he said, a lot of good men were ordered by our government to go fight communism and die in Vietnam. Would you order young men and women to go fight communism and die in Taiwan? And I said, absolutely, I would not. And he said, you've earned my vote today because you learned the mistakes from the past.
Would there be any material aid of any kind to Taiwan?
I think individuals can provide whatever the aid they want to. I don't think the United States government needs to be providing military aid anywhere around the world. We need to disengage this idea that we're going to be the world's police and that we're going to export our values, militarism. But if an individual wants to donate to the cause, same frankly as with Ukraine, if you want to donate your money to it, or yourself to it, if you want to go fight there, go do that. Just don't insist the United States government do that with our taxpayer money, and certainly not with the blood and treasure of the United States military.
View on sanctions.
I think sanctions harm the worst off people in those nations the most, right? I don't think they're a very effective tool towards changing authoritarians' behavior because it affects them the least. It really affects the people under their regimes the most, and actually foments hatred of the United States. It's very easy for those authoritarians to say, see, the reason why you're miserable is because the United States sanctions us. It's the thing Cuba's been doing for 70 years now.
But look at Russia. Russia's in the same position economically, but the public is there, has totally turned on us.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take this question. It's easy to talk about the negatives of an opponent during campaign season. Can you think about one positive thing and say that about each of your opponents?
Yeah. I'll say a positive thing about Donald Trump, that he passed both the First Step Act and the Right to Try Act. I think those were both good pieces of legislation. I'm glad they named it the First Step Act because he tried to say, I did all of criminal justice. No, you did the first step,
Can
Donald.
you explain what First Step Act is?
So it's the First Step Act. It changed a lot of the sentencing structures for a lot of crimes, reformed our kind of the federal criminal justice system, allowed for more people to get early release for certain things. It basically kind of softened up the hard hand of the federal criminal justice system somewhat. I would like to see further reactions like ending the drug war, other things. And then the Right to Try Act, I think, is the most important. As an LGBTQ person, my community's first hatred of Anthony Fauci was not during the COVID pandemic, but during the HIV epidemic, when so many people were not allowed to try therapies and medications they wanted to, and it caused the misery and death of thousands of people who were stuck on AZT that was just destroying their immune system. And so for those who are suffering from terminal illness, I would like them to be able to try anything that they could to save themselves. Ultimately, I want to see a deregulation the medical marketplace altogether. But I think this is a great first step towards allowing those who are near death to try anything they can to give them better quality of life and maybe a longer life. Good things that Trump did there. Joe Biden, hey, even if I disagree with some of the manner in which he did it, he finally got us out of Afghanistan. And I can say that's something I've been asking for a president to do since 2001. So even if he bungled the way it was done and we left a lot of hardware there, we're out of there. And that is a good thing. That is a good thing for the United States to no longer be in Afghanistan the way we have been since 2001. And so I am willing to give credit where credit is due there, that Biden followed through. And he didn't have to. He could have reneged on that and said, we need a surge or we need this or that. But he didn't. He followed through even knowing it was going to be a difficult thing. And he got rightfully a lot of criticism for the way it was happened. But ultimately, it was the right thing to do. And he made the right decision there.
All right, let's do a couple questions on Inside Baseball. All right, Libertarian Party stuff. So John asks, some libertarians think you have a problem with Ron Paul. What do you say to those folks tonight, and how can you win those people back?
Yeah, I say to those folks, they've probably seen a single screenshot. And, they say a picture says 1,000 words, but many times those words are incorrect and out of context. I respect a lot of the things Ron Paul has had to say. If you look at that screenshot, it was taken on a day that Ron Paul wrote something that I felt was very hyperbolic. I was hyperbolic in response. I think if we're all judged on one single thing we say on Facebook or Twitter, we're all doomed. Again, actions speak louder than words. And in addition to obviously praising many of the things Ron Paul has done since that one single post, I was also in the hall during our convention clapping as he gave a very good speech talking about liberty, particularly seeing all the young people around him at the front of the stage was kind of endearing to see. And no, I don't agree with Ron Paul on every single thing, but that's kind of the nature of being a libertarian. No libertarian agrees with every libertarian on every other thing.
Yeah.
But I can respect his contributions. I can respect the fact that he brought a lot of really good people into the movement. And no, I don't hate Ron Paul. I think that's ridiculous. I try not to hate anybody. I think hatred is, oftentimes a very negative emotion that leads you to very negative outcomes. I can disagree with people. I can vehemently oppose people, but I try to reserve outright hatred for people who deserve it, not for congenial former congressmen from the state of Texas.
As I understand it, things have been somewhat difficult for your campaign compared to maybe previous campaigns. What has the experience of campaigning with county affiliates, state affiliates, maybe even national, what has that been like this cycle, considering the party seems to be fractured?
Well, there's a certain amount of stress that comes from that, but I really try not to focus on the fracturing. I'm really trying to focus on seeing what we can do to unify the message. And if you look at what I've been running on and the kind of message, it has been boilerplate libertarianism. And I'm sure there are people who might have personal disagreements with me on particular subjects here and there. But as long as we're not trying to facilitate the government being used to impose that will upon other people, I can agree to disagree with other people. It's stressful seeing headwinds coming from people within your own party. But you know what? We're going to keep churning along. We're going to keep doing the work we need to do to speak to as many voters as possible, to spread the message of libertarianism as much as possible, and to ultimately grow this party. That's the goal. I'm not in it just for one election either. I'm going to stay maintained in this party and keep working in this party. I'm a lifetime member. I got my lifetime Indiana pin here, but I'm also a lifetime national member. And I'm devoted to building up this party to be a true challenger to the two-party system. So,
yeah, I think it's interesting that if you really look back through the last few campaigns, you'd have to go back to Harry Brown to find somebody that's just kind of a homegrown party member that is the presidential nominee that just talks about pure orthodox libertarianism.
Yeah, I think I am the last one since Harry Brown who was like a party member for a decade before I sought my party's nomination for president, other than Jo Jorgensen. Jo Jorgensen was a longtime party member. She was Harry Brown's running mate, for God's sakes. But previous to those election cycles, with Gary both times, he was a former Republican governor. Bob Barr before that, Bednarik before that. Like, they all came from somewhere else. And I don't hate anybody that comes to Libertarian from somewhere else. I came to Libertarian Party from the Democratic Party after I realized they were sellouts on the issue of being anti-war. And so I appreciate people who wake up and come into Liberty. I want them to feel welcome here. But as far as a candidate, I've been working within the party for a long period of time. I love the Libertarian Party. I want to see it grow and flourish. If there are people who disagree with me on style or a particular topic, let that be in the realm of disagreement. But I think it's backwards thinking to think, oh, well, we're gonna attack our own party's candidate. Hey, if you want, let's be real. If Dave Smith was your guy in 24 and he didn't run, and you want him to run in 28, don't you want the party to be in better functioning hands for him to be able to take that office in 28? Vote Libertarian. Help build up the Libertarian Party and state affiliates all over the country. You don't have to love me to recognize that I'm broadly Libertarian. I'm more Libertarian than any other candidate that's going to be on the ballot. And even if you include the areas of disagreement that maybe some critics might have of mine, if you just put it up on like we agree with each other 90% plus the time, why would you think it's worth it to sell out to, say, a Donald Trump you agree with half the time, or an RFK you agree with 40% of the time, or Kamala Harris you agree with 30% of the time? To me, it's just better to, stick with libertarianism and help build the party going forward. And I would be doing that if I was not the nominee. If Michael Rechtenwald had won on that convention floor, I would have endorsed him. I would encourage Georgians to vote for him. Why? Not because he was my first choice. Obviously, I was my first choice. But because I want to win for the party, and I want to build the party going forward and ease and secure ballot access and party status in as many places as possible. So I recognize this is business; it's not personal, and I have to keep that mindset and just keep plugging away and fighting to spread the libertarian message as a happy warrior for liberty.
Chase Oliver, where can people find out more information about you?
You can find me at votechaseoliver.com. That's my website where you can find our full policy platform. You can find all the media we've done in the past. You can join on as a volunteer, become a donor supporter. And if you want to follow along at social media, it's at Chase for Liberty on all major platforms. Follow us there, join along, share and spread the wealth. Make sure everybody knows there's a libertarian option on their ballot. I will keep fighting for you if you keep fighting for the Libertarian Party.
All right, and we have more of a biocentric podcast that you and I did a year or two ago that is in the feed, and I'll put that in the show notes if you want to hear more about your background and a little bit more about how you ended up here.
Yep.
Because you started running like 2 years before.
Literally,
you've been doing this a long time.
A month after I ran for the United States Senate, I started running for president. I say, as of November, I started running for Senate in November of 2021. And so come November 5th, I will have been running for office as a libertarian for 3 years straight. Boy, am I looking forward to some time off the road.
Are you crazy?
A little bit. I think anybody who runs for office has to be a little crazy.
It's a thankless job. Thank you for running and offering libertarians a position on their ballot, and appreciate it. I know often you get no thank yous and a lot of scorn, and it's terrible, but thanks for all that you do.
Hey, thank you for providing a platform for folks to hear a little bit more about the campaign. And for those of you who are watching or listening out there, thank you for fighting for liberty in your communities all over the country, whatever you do.
All right, and thank you for listening to the Chris Spangle Show. We appreciate you, and we will see you again soon.